If they had told me 10 years ago exactly how my marriage would end, I would never have believed it. But the reality is that my marriage ended and I faced a serious problem. My wife cheated on me and I had video evidence. It was Friday lunchtime at the Peanut Bar, where the Idiots Club meets weekly to share our troubles. Our group isn't very large or impressive, just 4 middle-aged guys with one unfortunate thing in common. Our wives are all cheating on us. Bradley Cook, Ray Timmons, Carl Marshall, and I, John Terrell, have known each other since high school. We each married our high school sweethearts, and we've stayed friends over the past 20 years. Between us, we have 6 kids. 2 of them are mine, all in high school or college. We've always stayed busy, working to support our families and pay the bills. But our wives, as the kids grew older, found themselves with a lot of free time. They spent it together, shopping and going on daytime outings, while we guys were mostly limited to our Friday lunches and the occasional weekend BBQ or house party. Carl was the first to notice something odd, initially suspecting only his wife, Betsy. He mentioned it during one of our lunches, and that opened the floodgates. None of us had concrete proof that our wives were cheating, but we all noticed subtle signs that something wasn't right. Bradley even printed out a list of things to watch for if you suspect infidelity. As we reviewed the list, we each became paranoid. Our weekly lunch conversations quickly turned into detailed reports of our wives' activities from the past week. Soon, it felt like we were making things up, as if we were creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. But none of us had the courage to confront our wives directly. We'd been married too long to risk alienating them if we were wrong, and we were also worried about the impact a false accusation might have on our children. Our biggest fear, though, was that the suspicions might actually be true. Ray knew someone who had a friend at a private detective agency. We ended up paying $4,000 up front for 1 week of surveillance. We all pitched in, providing the detective with photos, phone numbers, license plate numbers, and descriptions of our wives' cars. He was set to begin on Monday and promised to give us a report at our next Friday meeting. It was going to be a long week. The women were all approaching 40, but hadn't quite reached it yet, and they all looked great for their age. Carl's wife, Betsy, was tall, with straight auburn hair that fell to her shoulders, completely free of curls. She had full bangs that came down to her eyebrows, giving her eyes a deep, mysterious look. This compensated for her lack of curves, as she had a small bust and narrow hips, even after having 2 daughters. Ray and his wife, Jenny, had 1 son who was away at college. He was an unplanned pregnancy when they were still in high school. Jenny was the shortest of the group, just over 5 feet tall. She had slightly wider hips but dressed in a way that downplayed them. She dyed her hair blonde and wore it up to appear taller, though it didn't quite achieve the effect. Jenny had the most fun-loving personality of the bunch and always knew how to make people laugh. Bradley married a spirited Italian woman named Carla. Carla had the kind of figure any man would envy. Her hair was a dark shade, almost black, which perfectly complemented her olive skin. She was a non-stop talker, and they had a daughter who was her spitting image. My wife, Marcy, seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group. Marcy wasn't quite as tall as Betsy, but came close. She had, naturally, blonde hair that she wore off her shoulders. I always thought she was beautiful, though she had some acne scars from her teenage years, which she covered with makeup. She was self-conscious about them, and I made sure never to mention it. I wasn't the most attractive guy around, but I felt lucky just being with her. By Thursday night, I was a mess. Marcy was in a good mood, and we enjoyed a nice dinner together. My sons, Josh and Jordan, left the house by 6, off to who knows where. Their grades were fine and they stayed out of trouble, so I didn't bother asking what they were up to. Marcy and I spent the evening in front of the TV like we usually did. It occurred to me that this routine might be part of the issue. I wasn't bringing enough excitement into her life, but at the time, I didn't realize I actually had a problem. Tomorrow, I'd get some news, good or bad. I wanted to talk to her about it, but I didn't know how to start. So I spent most of the evening lost in thought. Not long after Marcy went to bed, the boys came home. We had a quick chat about nothing important, and they headed to bed too. I grabbed a beer and stayed up, watching old sitcoms until I dozed off on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, the TV was still on, and the boys were heading out to school. "John, what's wrong? You've seemed off the past week. Is something going on at work?" Marcy asked, looking concerned. "No, everything's fine at work, honey. I just have a lot on my mind." "Can I help? Is there anything I can do?" I slowly pulled myself off the couch and headed upstairs. "I'm afraid it's too late now. What's done can't be undone," I muttered, leaving her with that vague bit of philosophy as I went to shower. 30 minutes later, I was heading out the door. Marcy had made coffee and a light breakfast, but I walked right past her without saying a word. She looked worried, and rightly so. The rest of the morning dragged on. I thought lunchtime would never come. Carl, Bradley, and Ray were already seated when I arrived. I had thought I would be early, but they all beat me there. We decided not to order food, but each of us had a draft beer. Frank Perella was the secret agent assigned to our case, a half-hearted attempt to inject some humor into what was otherwise a grim situation. "All right, gentlemen, I have reports from 4 different days, each involving a different wife. Does anyone want to go first, or should I go through it day by day?" We all agreed to go day by day, and Frank began with Monday. "First off, all of your wives are seeing someone. Over the first 4 days, we just gathered information on the when and where. We don't have hard evidence like photos or audio, as that would cost more and take longer." He paused, probably for dramatic effect. Interestingly, only one wife would meet someone on any given day. The other 3 acted as her cover. They would all leave and return together. If they were shopping, the 3 who weren't meeting anyone would buy something for the one who was. I assume if anything went wrong, they'd cover for each other. Any questions so far? None of us had questions, so he continued. On Monday, they all left together in Marcy's car. It was the easiest tale of the week. At 10 a.m., they dropped Carla Cook off at 321 David Drive, then went to Berkshire Mall. I returned to David Drive to see what happened next. A man named Steve Springer rents the house. He works as a body repairman at Henderson Ford in Tarrytown. We later found out there was a phone call made to the house 10 minutes before Carla was dropped off. The same phone was used in all the other meetings. It's an unregistered phone, but we have the number. We just don't know which of the wives actually has it. Bradley wasn't looking too good. He seemed irritable and was struggling to keep his temper in check. Ray spoke to him softly, and that seemed to calm him down a bit. About 3 hours later, a call was made from the house phone to a cell phone. 10 minutes after that, Marcy and the girls drove by to pick up Carla. She dropped each of them off at their homes. That was the end of Monday. Any questions? Bradley, clearly on edge by now, asked, "Can I get a beer?" We ended up ordering 5 drafts. Frank took a sip from his glass and went on. On Tuesday, Carla drove. They all went to Renninger's Antique Market, about 10 miles out of town. After parking, they stuck together as they entered the market. It was hard to keep track of them in the crowded aisles, but soon something happened. About 10 minutes before they arrived, A call was made to the Dorchester Motel across the highway. Betsy Marshall slipped away from the group, exited through the front entrance, and crossed the road to enter room 114 at the Dorchester, which Richard Tolliver had reserved the day before. Mrs. Marshall stayed there for over 2 hours, then rejoined the group at the same spot where she had left. They all left the market and headed home. Any questions? I couldn't resist asking, "Carl, who on earth is Richard Tolliver?" "He's our optometrist." I did think it was odd that she was going for eye exams so frequently, Carl muttered, slumping into his chair after finishing his beer. The mood around the table was far from cheerful. We decided to order another round. Betsy got to drive on Wednesday. They went to the Green Dragon Farmers Market. That day a phone call was made to another cell phone, but it was traceable. Instead of parking near the market, they went all the way to the back of the lot, where the RVs park. The 4 of them walked through the RV section, but only 3 actually went into the market. I had to go back to investigate what happened to Jenny Timmons. She had disappeared. I wrote down the license plates of 23 potential vehicles she might have slipped into. My team cross-referenced the phone number that was called with the RV license plates. Within an hour, I found myself standing across from a large Winnebago owned by Owen Zimmer. He owns the Volvo dealership in Lancaster. Just after noon, Jenny left the RV and rejoined the group for lunch. They were all laughing and joking as they walked back to the car for the ride home. "Ray, you drive a Volvo, don't you?" "Yeah, we bought it in Lancaster last year. I was trying to do something nice for Jenny." "That's a joke, but don't any of you dare laugh." I was anxious about what was coming next. I was the last one left and definitely didn't want another beer. "All right, Frank, I can't handle the suspense anymore. What happened on Thursday?" Jenny drove the Volvo to the King of Prussia Mall on Thursday. They walked in casually. Marcy made a phone call and then handed the phone to Jenny. The executive suites are attached to the mall on the north end. The group moved in that direction, and then Marcy Terrell slipped away and entered the elevator. At the time, all we knew was that she went up to the 5th floor. It took us a few hours, but my team managed to trace the call to a room registration. State Assemblyman Alice Hoffman had rented room 511 for the afternoon for a business meeting. At 2 p.m., a call was made from that room to the mysterious number. 10 minutes later, the women were back together and heading home. That's the summary. We're preparing detailed reports for each of you. If you want more information, we'll be happy to provide it. Suddenly, I found myself smiling. Carl noticed and asked, "What's so funny?" Alice Hoffman is a Democrat, and both Marcy and I are registered Republicans. I just thought that was amusing. The rest of the guys didn't get the joke. Frank gathered his papers. He had brief reports for each of us, almost like rough drafts, but they covered the key details. We thanked him as he left. Now we were left alone in our misery. No one wanted another beer. Ray and Carl had already taken the rest of the day off, and Bradley and I followed soon after. When I got home, Marcy's car was gone. She was out grocery shopping, thankfully on her own. The boys were still in school, so I took the opportunity to move my clothes and personal items into the guest room. I came downstairs just in time to help Marcy unload the groceries. She didn't ask why I was home early, but the concerned look she had when I left this morning was still on her face. I tried to stay out of her way as she busily put the groceries away. She knew where everything went, but I didn't. In no time she had dinner started. She was a great cook and homemaker. Just as the boys got home from school, the phone rang. I greeted them with the usual chit-chat while Marcy answered the call. When she hung up, she looked worried. The boys had already gone upstairs to their rooms. "What did you guys do this afternoon?" I'm not sure what you're talking about. That was Jenny on the phone. Bradley came home early from work and accused Carla of cheating on him. They ended up in a fight, and now Carla is in the hospital. The police are questioning Bradley. Jenny called Carla's parents. She said it all started because of some meeting you guys had earlier today. John, what's going on? Why don't you tell me? Now's not the time to be smart. I want an explanation. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and hit the new speed dial number I had set earlier. I watched as the color drained from Marcy's face when the prepaid phone, hidden in her purse, began to ring. I wasn't sure she had it, but I took a chance. Aren't you going to answer that? It might be important. There was a brief pause. Oh, God. You know, don't you? I know everything. We all know everything. Just then, Josh and Jordan came downstairs for dinner. You're not going to say anything in front of the boys, are you? I won't, as long as you do. Tell them everything, and I'll keep quiet. But if you lie or try to sugarcoat it, I'll tell them myself. And you won't like that. We began the meal as usual. I didn't think it was necessary for Marcy to tell them right away. It would be better to finish eating and let her bring it up when the moment felt right. But things didn't go as planned. Shortly after we started, Josh spoke up. Dad, why did you move all your stuff into the guest room? Is something going on between you two? Both of our sons were watching us closely, but they didn't stop eating. Marcy hadn't realized I'd moved my things. I'll let your mother explain, I said. Marcy was clearly nervous. I had a feeling she wouldn't be able to say it, and I was right. Your father and I think it's a good idea to spend some time apart. It's just temporary, and there's nothing for you boys to worry about. I put my fork down on my plate and turned to my wife. I'm sorry, Marcy, but this is unacceptable. Either you tell them the truth or I will. She was clearly agitated. At that time, she still did not know what I knew, and, of course, did not want to reveal everything in front of the children. I'm sorry, John, but that's all I can do. Josh and Jordan put down their forks and watched us closely. The longer I waited, the more frustrated I became. Yesterday afternoon, your mother was intimate with her lover for 4 hours at the Executive Suite Hotel in King of Prussia. The room was quiet. Marcy knew I was aware of everything and kept her gaze fixed on her plate, avoiding eye contact with anyone. It seemed like she wasn't even breathing. The boys stood up and left through the front door together. That was harsh, John. You didn't have to do that. I gave you a choice and you didn't take it. Given what you did to me, that wasn't harsh. I'll move out of the guest room as soon as I can find an apartment. Marcy finally began to cry and ran upstairs. I cleaned up the dinner dishes, which ended up in the trash since no one had eaten. While I was loading the dishwasher, she came downstairs with a small bag. She paused at the door and, without looking back, said quietly, "It wasn't unprotected intimacy." We always used condoms, that had been my assumption, but at least the accusation had elicited a confession from her. Where will you go? I'm going to stay with Janice. I watched as she got into her car and drove to her sister's house. The boys returned home after midnight. I was in the living room with my 5th beer. They glanced at me and went upstairs without saying a word. I was still lying on the couch the next morning when the doorbell started ringing incessantly. A short stumble later, I found Ray and Carl at the door with coffee and Danish pastries. Carl set everything up on the kitchen table. We sat in silence for a while before Carl finally broke it. Bradley's still in jail, waiting for his parents to bail him out. Carla's been released from the hospital and she and her daughter moved in with her parents. We don't know if she's going to press charges or not. It's pretty sad that a grown man has to rely on his parents for bail money. How about you guys? What's the situation at home? Carl spoke first. When I got home today, there was a message on the answering machine. Jenny called and left a message for Betsy saying I knew everything. I checked around the house, and half her clothes and personal stuff were gone. I don't know where she is. Thankfully, the girls are away at school. That's all I've got. Ray didn't want to speak, but felt he should. Jenny left me a note saying she was going to visit her parents in Frackville for the weekend. She said she'd call when she arrived. No call yet. Well, I'm in the same situation. Marcy and I argued last night, some of it in front of the boys. Instead of talking it through, she packed a bag and went to her sister's. I have no idea when I'll hear from her. Carl, how did they even find out that we knew? Carl was worried, as things had gotten out of control. I'm guessing Bradley confronted Carla when he got home, and she managed to call Jenny before things escalated. I'm pretty sure Jenny called Marcy around dinner time. That's probably when she left the message for Betsy, too. What about the others? Does anyone know what's happening with the jerks who caused all this? Ray was clearly starting to get heated about the whole situation. We spent the next few hours sharing our problems. Josh and Jordan came down for breakfast and listened to the conversation but didn't say a word. I chose not to hide anything from them. After Carl and Ray left, the boys and I had an honest conversation. They expressed their desire to stay in the house until they finished school. Both of them preferred to spend that time with me rather than their mother. I made no effort to tarnish her reputation or influence their decision. It didn't seem to make a difference. The boys and I spent Sunday working in the yard, mowing, trimming, and tackling the chores we usually put off. We were just trying to pass the time. The family situation wasn't mentioned all day. Marcy didn't call. Bradley called to let me know he had been released on bond. Carla had filed a restraining order against him. It was kind of ironic that the four of us, who hadn't done anything wrong, were the ones paying for the mistakes our wives made. The whole situation felt off. Things didn't improve the next day either. I was glad that Josh and Jordan were old enough to look after themselves. Josh was heading to college in 3 months, and Jordan would be gone by the following year. Bradley came by the house before I left for work. We grabbed breakfast at IHOP and caught up on things. Carla had agreed to drop the charges against him if he accepted a no-fault divorce. For Bradley, it was an easy choice. He planned to start the paperwork as soon as we finished eating. I also knew I had to do something because, in my mind, the marriage was already done. Each of us had our own issues to deal with, but Bradley and I thought it might be a good idea for all four of us to meet. I promised to bring the pizza if they handled the beer. Work wasn't any easier. Joyce, my faithful secretary, tried to pry about why I didn't come back Friday afternoon. She gave up when she realized I wasn't going to talk. The real surprise came just before lunch. "Mr. Terrell, I'm Nelson Noose from the state attorney's office." The man was overweight, with a bad case of rosacea and sweat beading between his thinning hair and forehead. I decided not to shake his hand. "What can I do for you?" "This is a cease and desist order from the state. You are ordered to stop all investigations into the personal life of Assemblyman Alice Hoffman. Any further actions will lead to criminal charges." He handed me a manila folder with legal documents inside. "I thought Assemblyman Hoffman was a public figure and, therefore, subject to such inquiries," I responded. "Are you a lawyer, Mr. Terrell?" "No." "Then I suggest you read the order and stay out of trouble." He smirked as he said it, but I leaned back in my chair and smiled right back at him. He seemed less sure of himself as he left the office. I took the rest of the day off. In the Philadelphia area, there were 4 major TV stations covering 3 states, along with 3 smaller stations in nearby towns. It took me an hour to drive to Philly. 3 of the 4 major stations were eager to hear about the cease and desist order, and 2 of them even recorded interviews with me. I didn't hold back and, unfortunately, had to include my wife in the same criticisms I made about Hoffman. The one station that wasn't interested in the story was extremely liberal and didn't want to upset any Democratic Party leaders. On my way home, I visited the 3 smaller stations, but they had already gotten the story from the wire service. Just as I pulled into my driveway, I heard the assemblyman's affair being discussed on a talk radio show. I didn't investigate Alan Hoffman's personal life any further, but I shared what I already knew. He chose the fight, and I simply agreed to participate. Any legal action from the state or the assemblyman would only draw more attention to the situation. Marcy had come home while I was out and taken all of her clothes and personal belongings. Her intentions were clear. She left a note explaining that she'd be staying with her sister indefinitely. I had no choice but to stay in the house with the boys, which was fine with me. Tomorrow would be a good day to go to the bank, if it wasn't already too late. I also needed to see a lawyer. Josh and Jordan came home from school and immediately went out again. Things were civil between us, but they preferred spending time with their friends. Just after 5, I got a frantic call from Marcy. She didn't really say what she wanted. She just ranted about how terrible I was for airing our private matters publicly. I tried to explain what her boyfriend had done to spark it all, but she didn't want to hear it. Apparently, it didn't matter what the circumstances were. I was at fault for everything. This was starting to get amusing. Not long after that, Carl, Bradley, and Ray arrived. I ordered pizza and we settled in for a long evening. Richard Tolliver vanished, taking the last few months' deposits from Superlens Optical with him, totaling over $60,000. Since he was only the manager, not the owner, the money wasn't his to take. Carl was quite sure Betsy had gone with him. Though Carl had canceled all his credit cards, Betsy managed to use one at a motel in Indiana before he did. He immediately informed the authorities about the card's usage. Bradley had driven past the house at 321 David Drive and found it empty. He then went by the body shop where Steve Springer used to work. Bradley believed Springer would have a final paycheck and likely left a forwarding address. He told the staff that he was Steve's landlord and needed to send him his rent deposit refund. They happily provided him with the new address. Once the divorce papers were finalized, Bradley planned to take a trip to Nitro, West Virginia. We all wished him good luck. Ray had a mischievous grin on his face when he told us about Jenny's Volvo going missing. The car had been parked outside her parents' house in Frackville. It was insured, of course, but the payout exceeded its current appraised value. Jenny hadn't contacted him yet, nor had anyone informed him about the missing car. He assured us that Owen Zimmer would be hearing from him soon. As for what he did with the car, I have no idea. After I went over everything related to the TV expose on Alan Hoffman, we talked about how we might help each other. We called it a night when we ran out of beer. By the time I had started tidying up, the boys had come home. They were upset, getting a lot of grief over their mother, and I wasn't sure how to help them. I never made it to work the next morning. Joyce called me on my cell before I got there. Some state officials and police were waiting for me at the office. She told them I'd be in Baltimore for the rest of the day, and also informed HR that I was taking a sick day. I spent the morning with my lawyer and the afternoon at the bank. If any state officials were still looking for me, they weren't doing a great job. Then, around 3 o'clock, I got a phone call I wasn't expecting. Jack Terrell? This is Alice Hoffman. Actually, it's John, but I'll answer to anything. What can I do for you? Meet me at Luciano's bar at 5. I'll know who you are. Is there any particular reason? I think we can help each other. No more questions for now. I'll see you at 5. That call came out of nowhere. I had seen pictures of Alice Hoffman in the news and in the papers. She was the real power behind her weak husband. She came from money and knew how to use it. I had a feeling Alan had pushed things too far this time. Alice always looked immaculate. Perfect hair, makeup, and designer clothes. She practically defined high maintenance. Maybe Marcy wanted to take her place, but Alan didn't have the kind of money Alice did. I stopped by the house to grab a clean shirt and tie, but couldn't get in. 2 official-looking cars were parked outside. I guess she'd have to meet me as I was, sweaty and disheveled. I had no difficulty spotting Alice Hoffman in the restaurant. A large man in a dark suit greeted me at the door and led me to a secluded corner booth. Do you mind if I call you Jack? Not at all. My father always calls me Jack, but he's the only one who does. The lighting was dim, but I could see her blonde hair streaked with silver. It wasn't dyed. She was over 40, but carried herself gracefully. She wore a simple outfit, a white blouse and a beige skirt, with a crystal heart pendant on a silver chain that seemed to pull the look together. I wanted to thank you for the excellent job you did in exposing my husband. I couldn't have done better myself, although I wanted to. However, I am sorry for the price you had to pay. For a loving husband, discovering something like this must be awful. My goal wasn't to embarrass you or your husband. I would have preferred to keep things discreet. Unfortunately, your husband pushed the wrong buttons. I don't respond well to threats. I understand. I'm not humiliated or embarrassed, Jack. If anything, I feel relieved. I was already preparing to leave the fool, but I couldn't do it without appearing vindictive or bitter. You took care of that for me. Since we're both in this now, I thought we could help each other. You want me to play the bad guy so you can get a divorce? Exactly. Can you manage that? And how do you plan to help me? I have 3 videos of your wife and my husband. They're high quality and very explicit. I'd be happy to give you copies to use in your divorce if you promise to make them public somehow. That would be cruel to my wife. I don't mind going after your husband, but I'd find it hard to do something like that to my wife, no matter what she's done. You might change your mind after watching them. The conversation between Alan and your wife in the last tape is particularly unpleasant. Some of the things said are hurtful and cruel. It's hard to believe someone could be married for 20 years and think so poorly of their spouse. They didn't treat me much better either. I hope you'll take my feelings into account when you decide whether or not to make the tapes public. But the choice is yours. I trust you to be fair. Now, I'm starting to feel a bit guilty. Can we get something to drink? Alice waved her hand, and a waiter seemed to appear out of nowhere. We sat in silence for a few minutes until the drinks arrived. I was lost in thought while she waited anxiously for my response. I gently squeezed the lime into my gin and tonic. Without it, it's just booze and soda. My mind wandered to what she said was on those tapes. All right, I'll do it. It was worth it just to see her eyes light up. Alan Hoffman was a fool, not realizing what he had at home. A foolish, foolish man who had thrown away his life. Jack, I'll make sure you're no longer hassled by any state or local authorities. My husband may hold the office, but he doesn't have nearly as much power as he thinks. She slid 3 CDs across the table to me. Make copies of these, edit them however necessary. The 3rd one has some phone conversations too. I hope this will be a fun project for you. Feel free to use the internet if it helps. I know you have 2 sons. Don't do anything that could embarrass them. I'm not going to embarrass you, am I? I'm not on any of the videos. It might hurt my feelings, but it won't embarrass me. I sensed our meeting was winding down. Will I see you again, Mrs. Hoffman? Do you think it's necessary, or do you just want to? I'm sorry, that was out of line. It didn't come out the way I meant. Oh, now my feelings are hurt. We both smiled. I pocketed the CDs and stood up to leave. Friday, 7 o'clock at this table. This time we'll eat. Is that okay? I smiled and nodded. For some reason I felt a bit guilty, but I liked it. When I got home, the black cars were gone. Josh and Jordan had thrown together a dinner for us. It wasn't exactly balanced, just a bunch of stuff they liked, but I appreciated the effort. Later, we watched a pay-per-view movie together. I spent the whole night editing videos and phone conversations that Alice Hoffman provided to me. Most of the 3 videos were boring. They only had short, interesting moments. Most of all, it hurt me to see Marcy's face when Alan was with her. She never let me do it, but he was able to do it in all 3 recorded sessions. She denied it, but she clearly enjoyed doing it with him. During the break, she even told him how lucky he was to get something that she hadn't even shared with her husband. At the end of the final recording, Alan spoke briefly on the phone with his girlfriend after Marcy left. Only part of his conversation was recorded, but it was important enough for me to make a separate copy in case I needed to show it to Marcy later. The next day, I had to go back to work, exhausted from not sleeping most of the night. I thanked Joyce for giving me a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers, to replace it. By this point, she, like everyone else in the office, already knew what was going on. I wasn't sure if people thought I was a hero or a fool. A television station from Philadelphia agreed to meet with me about the recordings, which saved me time for the trip and the whole day. The TV reporter who had received the edited CD was excited to get it. He carefully explained that most of its content couldn't be shown on public television, which I completely understood. Casually, I asked if the remaining part might somehow end up being shown elsewhere. He smiled, acknowledging what I meant without saying a word. Sensing his openness, I handed him a second CD containing much more explicit material. He shook my hand, assuring me that everything would be handled to my satisfaction. Both Josh and Jordan scored high enough on their SATs to make getting into college easy. Unbeknownst to me, Jordan had applied for early admission based on his scores, needing only to get a GED instead of finishing another year of high school. Though I wasn't thrilled with the idea, he arranged everything and felt confident. Now I had both of them preparing to start Penn State at the same time. I took out a second mortgage on the house and prepaid 4 years of tuition for both of them. That drained all our savings and the equity Marcy and I had in the house. With that settled, I was ready to finalize the terms of our divorce. My wife would not be pleased. I was falling behind at work, though Joyce was doing a great job covering for me. Still, she couldn't keep that up forever. Marcy called to complain about her credit cards no longer working. I used that moment to inform her she'd have to start using her prepaid cell phone because I was canceling her regular one later that day. That evening, I told the boys they might come across disturbing videos of their mother online. Though they weren't thrilled, they reassured me they supported whatever needed to be done. The next morning, Marcy waited outside until Josh and Jordan left for school, and then she knocked on the door. She took a seat at the kitchen table, and I handed her a cup of coffee. "John, can we put a stop to this? Everything is spiraling out of control. I'm terrified to watch TV or even leave the house. I heard rumors that there are photos posted on various websites. This isn't fair, John. I know I made mistakes, but I was careful and discreet, trying not to embarrass or hurt you. Your efforts to be discreet didn't work out so well, did they? Do you have any idea how much embarrassment you've caused your sons? I didn't do that. You did. By making everything public, you ruined everything. I think keeping it quiet would have been better. I told you before that I would have been willing to do that. But when your lover threatened me, I had no choice but to change my mind. What made you get involved with such a despicable person in the first place? He wasn't despicable. He was understanding and caring. You took me for granted. He appreciated me. He flattered me and made me feel good about myself. After being with him, my self-esteem was high for days. He wasn't despicable. It was upsetting to hear my wife justify her infidelity. The troubling part was that she was completely mistaken about his feelings for her. Although it would be harsh, I felt it was time to shatter her fantasy. I took out a small digital recorder from my pocket and placed it on the table. This is a recording of a phone call Alice Hoffman made to a friend the last time the two of you were together. I'm sorry, but under the circumstances, I feel obligated to play it for you. I don't think it's fair for you to blame me for what you did. For 20 years, I treated you with decency and respect, and you threw it all away for him. I pressed the play button and watched her expression as Alice Hoffman began to speak. It was a one-sided conversation. Hi, Greg. Sorry, I'm a little late. Pause. As always, it's amazing. It's a great way to brighten up a cloudy day. Pause. I don't think so, buddy. She's great in bed, but I wouldn't go out with her in public. Pause. Behind closed doors with dim lights, she's amazing, but nothing more. The only reason I still see her is because of her figure. Pause. I know, but her face looks like it was dipped in a toilet bowl. I swear she's applying makeup with a brush. That's why I always dim the lights. Pause. I'm not sure if she's willing to have a threesome, but I can suggest it at our next meeting. Pause. No, it's okay. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Click. Marcy sat in silence, staring blankly in front of her. She wasn't really focused on anything, just watching. Her eyes seemed to fill with tears. I knew that the recording had hurt her. In all the years we've been together, I've carefully avoided mentioning her teenage pimples and the scars they left. I never wanted to hurt her like that. She looked at me intently. I didn't need to hear that. What did you hope to achieve by listening to this tape? I thought I could leave good memories of this whole mess, but now you've ruined even that. It was amazing. Alice Hoffman, my wife's lover, revealed his true feelings for her, and she was upset with me. In 20 years, I have never commented on your complexion or anyone else, and you still prefer to support this jerk. I slipped the recorder into my pocket and stood up, ready to leave. She remained seated at the table, staring straight ahead. As I turned to leave, I asked, "Why did you lie about the condoms?" I didn't expect a response, and none came. Once I arrived at work, I contacted my lawyer and instructed him to serve the divorce papers as soon as possible. We chose to cite infidelity as the reason, rather than something less severe. Carl called to arrange a lunch meeting. Joyce seemed quite self-satisfied because she had found 2 websites with videos of my wife and Assemblyman Hoffman. I was confident they wouldn't stay online for long due to privacy violations, but the damage would already be done by the time they were taken down. The local news reported that Alice Hoffman was on an unplanned vacation in the Bahamas, and there was no press statement available. Lunch with Carl was quite engaging. Betsy and Tolliver were picked up in Kentucky, near Fort Campbell, after a local officer conducted random checks on out-of-state license plates, seemingly just for practice. Unfortunately for them, Tolliver's plate came up as a match. Carl was unsure of what would transpire next, but appeared to be enjoying the situation at the moment. They contacted him to confirm her identity, but it seemed no further action was required on his part. Bradley borrowed a car and headed for Nitro, West Virginia. We were unsure of his plans and preferred not to inquire. We wished him good luck. Neither Carl nor I had heard from Ray in several days. The rest of the day was uneventful. A realtor friend was scheduled to visit later to list the house. With the boys preparing to leave and me on my own, I didn't really need it. I just hoped that after the real estate fees and closing costs, there would be enough left so I wouldn't have to pay out of pocket. That night's news was intriguing. A $300,000 motorhome was destroyed by fire in the parking lot of the Green Dragon Market. It belonged to Owen Zimmer, a businessman from Lancaster. Arson was suspected. I chuckled to myself as I grabbed a beer from the fridge, pleased to see Ray not taking things lying down. There was a Steven Seagal marathon on TV that night, as there often was. I made sure I had plenty of beer, though I had no idea where my sons were. Friday was a slow day at work, which was a relief. Marcy called after lunch about the "for sale" sign in the yard. I told her she could take any furniture she wanted from the house, and that we would split the proceeds 50-50. She didn't contest the house sale, which indicated to me that she knew there was no turning back. She wasn't aware that Jordan had been admitted to college early, suggesting the boys weren't communicating with their mother. Later that afternoon, she called again after receiving the divorce papers. I told her we could discuss it the next day. She seemed displeased with the reasons stated on the forms. I was looking forward to dinner that night. Alice Hoffman was seated in the same spot as the last time I saw her. However, this time she appeared absolutely radiant. Her hair and makeup were flawless, and her dress was both appropriate for the occasion and flattering. As I approached the table, I realized I was admiring her. "I didn't see your assistant when I arrived." "He has a piano recital to attend tonight, so I gave him the evening off. You might need to give me a ride home later, so keep an eye on your drinking." That somehow sounded like an invitation, which felt a bit awkward since we barely knew each other. "I don't think a little wine will hurt, John. Do you have a preference?" "I'm not much of a wine expert, but I'd be happy with a Portuguese rosé if they have it." How practical. This might turn out to be a cheap date for me. A few moments later, we were sharing a chilled bottle of Lancers. I took a sip and smiled. "Since this is a date, as you said, I feel I should cover the bill. Please don't order the lobster." The conversation remained light and enjoyable throughout the evening. At one point, Alice mentioned that it would help with her divorce if she could get a statement from Marcy confirming the affair. I promised to talk to her about it. We didn't order another bottle of wine, opting for coffee instead. Alice didn't order lobster, and I did end up paying for the evening. I drove her home and walked her to the door. She didn't invite me in, but I did receive a quick kiss on the cheek. She didn't resist. Everything ended perfectly, just as it started. I had a great time and enjoyed her company. On the drive home, I found myself trying to figure out how to see her again. The boys and I had just wrapped up breakfast when Marcy arrived. Josh and Jordan tried to be polite to their mother, but it didn't come off well. They both went outside, and a few minutes later, the lawnmower disrupted the morning's calm. "What can I do for you, Marcy?" I saw no reason for small talk, so I got straight to the point. "It's about the divorce terms. I was hoping you might consider softening them a bit." "You're not fond of the term infidelity? I understand it's completely warranted and you have every right to use it, but I'd feel better if you could tone it down a little." That didn't make much sense, especially since the media had already exposed everything to the public. I'll make you a deal. If you provide a statement to Alice Hoffman's lawyer confirming the affair with her husband, I'll change it to whatever you prefer. How did you get involved in Alice Hoffman's divorce? Why is that important to you? My relationship with Alice was purely professional, but I still felt a bit uneasy explaining it to Marcy. Despite what she had done, I felt a lingering sense of obligation and guilt, which now seemed ridiculous. I realized it was a silly trait to hold on to. Alice Hoffman reached out to me for help gathering information to support her divorce. She's the one who provided me with the videos of you and Alan. When the video was mentioned, Marcy had tears in her eyes. She wasn't crying, she was just sobbing. I handed her a paper napkin to help wipe her face. Janice and I watched some of them online. It was terrible. They didn't even bother to mask my face. At least they didn't tell me my name or where we live. How do you think I felt? I know this may sound cold, but I didn't consider how it would affect you or the boys. I didn't start to worry until I found out about the tapes. So you say you don't regret what you did, only that you were caught. As much as I hate to admit it, it's probably true. There is no way to fix what happened or fix it all again. I refilled her cup of coffee while she wiped her face once more. John, I'm sorry for what I did in those videos. I'm sorry you had to see this. What I can't figure out is why you did things to him that you wouldn't do to me. It hurt me to see you give back what you denied me. It seemed to me that you loved him more than me. Tears began to well up. I hadn't meant to upset her, but it seemed like she had steered the conversation in that direction. Surprisingly, I didn't feel guilty for causing her pain. He was wealthy and influential, and I felt compelled to please him. I didn't love him, but I wanted to be with him. Knowing I'm not particularly attractive or statuesque, I thought maybe I could make him happy with great intimacy. Desperation drove me to do things I had never done before, things that were dirty and dreadful, things I'd be embarrassed to do with you. I'm sorry I can't undo it. I placed my cup in the sink, no longer wanting any coffee, especially not with Marcy. I took a business card from the refrigerator for Alice Hoffman's lawyer and handed it to her. She took the hint and began to leave. Actually, Marcy, what you said on the tapes hurt me more than what you and he did together. Your comments about me and our relationship will haunt me forever. It felt like nothing was safe from your verbal attacks. You were unhappy with my appearance, my job, my ability to provide, and our intimacy life. It seems there was nothing I could do right in your eyes. The divorce will be such a relief for you. You'll finally be rid of your loser husband. John, please, it wasn't like that. Sorry, Marcy. Goodbye. As I shut the door and turned away, she stood on the porch, still crying. As her car drove away, the lawnmower stopped. Josh and Jordan came in and each grabbed a cold Coke. Are we going to get an update, or are we still in the dark? Josh asked, trying to be light-hearted but making his point clear. Your mother was unhappy because I filed for divorce due to adultery. She wanted to know if I could change the grounds to something that wouldn't make her look bad. I hope you didn't agree to that. She's your mother, Josh. Show a little compassion. They looked at me with some disappointment before heading back outside. Moments later, the lawnmower roared back to life. Now that Jordan had his GED, he was done with school. Josh still had to attend, but only to keep up his attendance, since he had already fulfilled all his graduation requirements. Jordan took advantage of his free time by working for a local landscaper to earn some extra cash. They had fun teasing each other about their situations. Josh enjoyed seeing the attractive girls at school, while Jordan enjoyed making money. Things were beginning to calm down a bit. Somehow, Owen Zimmer's wife discovered the cause of the fire that destroyed their motorhome. Owen, a salesman at the Volvo dealership who had married the owner's daughter, owned nothing himself. Everything was in her name. After his wife received a mysterious package in the mail, it quickly became clear that Owen was about to lose his job and his wife, ending up on the streets. Jenny continued to live with her parents, and Ray hadn't made any effort to contact her since filing for divorce. Bradley returned from West Virginia with a pleased expression, ensuring Carla received a newspaper article detailing the injuries Steve Springer sustained in an unprovoked weekend attack. According to Springer, 3 men assaulted him without reason as he left his home. In reality, it was just an angry husband with a baseball bat. Carla ended up canceling the divorce petition, though Bradley made no promises about their future. Carl served Betsy with divorce papers while she was in jail in Clarksville, then packed up everything and moved to Pensacola. I never found out what happened to Betsy after Carl left, and honestly, I didn't care. I was having lunch with Alice several times a week, and usually dinner once on the weekends. There was nothing romantic or intimacy between us, just good companionship. Over time, we stopped discussing the adultery or pending divorces. However, we did talk about Alan, who had not returned from the Bahamas or wherever he had gone. It seemed he was involved in a shady deal with some businessmen regarding franchising the state motor vehicle inspection business. Large amounts of money were exchanged, and many people were interested in talking to Mr. Hoffman. Alice wanted to meet Josh and Jordan, but I hesitated, fearing it could turn a good relationship into something awkward. All the members of my club seemed to have resolved their marital issues with some degree of satisfaction, while I felt mine was still unresolved. That changed in an unexpected way. Jordan managed to get approval for summer session classes for himself and Josh. With my consent, Josh was able to complete his diploma early, although he would miss the graduation ceremonies. Both boys could start college ahead of schedule. Jordan seemed to be quite the negotiator. I took some time off work to help them move to campus, leaving me alone at home. I didn't recall leaving a light on when I left, and I wasn't expecting to find a stout man in my living room. He had a Foster's beer in one hand and my first edition of The Big Kill in the other. Strangely, I wasn't startled. The beer was from my fridge and the book from my library. He looked confident and at ease as he greeted me. "Good evening, Mr. Terrell. I hope you don't mind me making myself comfortable while I waited for you. I assume your boys are settled in all right. I've always enjoyed Mickey Spillane's work. His first 5 novels were the best, don't you think?" The intruder was dressed in a blue blazer and a gray turtleneck, looking more suited for a country club than my living room. He wore bifocals that rested below his nose. I didn't respond immediately, but went to get a beer for myself. When I came back, he had placed the book on the side table. I sat across from him, giving him a once-over. He smiled and appeared very relaxed. "My name is Elwood Kincaid. Alice Hoffman is my only daughter, and she's in need of some help right now. From what I can see, you're the only one who can assist her." Now I knew what real money looked like. Anyone who appreciates Mike Hammer and Australian lager can't be all bad. "I'm all ears, Mr. Kincaid. Please continue." "There are several groups searching for my daughter's husband. Sadly, some of them are less than pleasant. I've had to move Alice to a secure location and need someone to keep an eye on her, someone trustworthy." "I thought she had someone on her staff for that purpose?" "Not anymore. I won't go into details. When I say watch over her, I don't mean physical protection. She needs companionship and comfort. From what she's told me, you're the best person for the job." Elwood Kincaid offered a sort of smile as he explained the situation. I wasn't sure if I felt uneasy or reassured. What exactly do you need from me? I just need you to stay with her for a week or two. He placed the empty bottle on the side table, carefully setting it on a napkin he had put there. Where is she now? Upstate New York. I have a small lodge in a remote area along the Chazy River. If it were any further north, it would be in Canada. I have a job I need to attend to. You're on a 2-week paid vacation starting today. Everything's been arranged. Can you explain again why you chose me? Mr. Kincaid seemed hesitant to answer. After fidgeting in his seat for a moment, he finally spoke. A few years ago, I made a grave mistake by forcing Alice to marry Alice Hoffman. I had thought he was a rising political star and would be an ideal husband for her. She didn't love him and initially rejected my suggestion. Unfortunately, I kept insisting until she gave in. I ruined her life and don't want to make another mistake. What makes you think I'm any better? She chose you. I'm not in a position to argue with her. I grabbed the 2 empty beer bottles and headed for the kitchen. No more for me, John. I've had 2 already. 3 beers and I'll be peage in bed. I returned with a fresh long neck in hand. How do I get to this place? He pulled out a small GPS device from his pocket. The coordinates are pre-programmed. You won't need it until you're north of Plattsburgh. Just in case, here's a map as well. I examined the GPS as Elwood Kincaid got up to leave. Feel free to take the book with you. Thanks, but I've read it 3 times already. When can you leave? I'll be out of here before sunrise. I finished my beer as he walked out. I didn't notice where he parked his car. I needed a shower and a good night's sleep. I was almost in Binghamton when my cell phone started buzzing. John, it's Janice. Where are you? I had trouble getting through. I'm on a little road trip. What's up? Marcy is missing. I haven't seen or heard from her since yesterday morning. I was hoping you might know something. Sorry, Janice. I was with the guys at State College all day yesterday. I have no idea where she might be. She hasn't called in a while. John, I don't know what to do. Can you come over to the house? I don't think so. I'm in New York State right now, heading toward Lake Champlain. I'll probably be here for at least a week, maybe longer. Have you contacted the police? Yes, they're on their way. I was hoping you'd be here to talk to them. I don't have any insights that might help. You've been closer to Marcy recently, so you might have a better idea of where she is or what she's doing than I do. I do care about her, but I'm not in a position to be much help. I'll call you once the police have left. I'll probably give them your cell number. Is that all right? No problem. Thanks for letting me know. Sorry I can't be of more help. I spent several hours reflecting on the life Marcy and I shared. For some reason, I found myself fixating on moments when I had doubts about her fidelity. There was never any concrete evidence, just moments of jealousy when she conversed with male acquaintances for extended periods at parties or other events. I also pondered the small trips she took with her female friends over the years. Given recent events, I now wondered if there might have been other affairs I was too naive to recognize at the time. I regretted being so trusting. Maybe if I had been more observant and affectionate, things might have turned out differently. A strong cup of Mickey D's coffee helped clear my mind. I didn't cheat. She did. End of story. The phone rang a few times just north of Saratoga Springs, but the reception was too poor to have a proper conversation. I decided not to worry about it and continued on my way. The lodge Elwood Kincaid directed me to was not near Chazy but further west. The GPS was invaluable. I don't think I would have found it otherwise. The west branch of the Chazy River was a stretch of rocks and white water, and it was stunning to drive alongside as the sun set. I imagined a rainbow beneath each rock. I hoped there would be fishing gear at my destination, but I missed the turn. The GPS promptly alerted me to my mistake. After traveling at least a quarter mile along a well-packed gravel road, I finally spotted the place. It was a stone lodge with a broad porch stretching across the entire front. Given the abundance of rocks in the area, it made sense that stone was used instead of logs. The lodge was situated on a small rise about 100 feet from the river. As soon as I opened the car door, the soothing sound of flowing water greeted me. Then I saw Alice standing in the lodge's doorway, framed by the light from the room behind her. I imagined she had been listening for the crunch of the gravel or watching for the headlights. I felt a warm glow from her eagerness to see me, and I was equally pleased to see her. She stood on the porch like an excited child while I carried up my bags. I had to set them down as she wrapped her arms around my neck in a heartfelt hug. It would have been the perfect moment for a real kiss, but we both pulled back, slightly embarrassed, before that could happen. She had hot chili cooking on the stove and cold beer in the fridge, an ideal way to end a long day. Alice and I talked for several hours. I tried to stay reserved, even though I liked her. Both of us were married, and I was somewhat inexperienced with romance. The guest room was comfortable, but the master bedroom would have been nicer. I knew I'd need to be a bit bolder tomorrow. I woke up to the aroma of sausage and biscuits. Alice waited until I made an appearance, scruffy face and all, before starting on the eggs. She was cheerful and upbeat. Most of her clothes seemed to come from LL Bean, which suited her much better than the city clothes she usually wore. She took pride in the quince jelly she made herself, and I had to admit it was delicious. After the first pot of coffee was finished, I used it as an excuse to shower and shave. I felt at ease enough to chat with her for the rest of the morning. The morning was spent exploring the property, which spanned several hundred secluded acres. A river marked one side, and the main road bordered the other. I had never seen so many rocks. It looked as though a glacier had rested there eons ago. After lunch, Alice showed me a small room filled with fishing gear. Her eyes sparkled when she saw my excitement. 2 weeks would fly by too quickly. I tried several times to reach Janice on my cell phone but had no success. Although the lodge had electricity, it lacked a phone, as her father preferred. It was hard to argue with that logic. While Alice took care of a few household tasks, I explored the equipment room. I didn't have a New York fishing license, but Elwood had left his fishing vest with a license attached. Although I doubted a fish and game warden would check this private stretch of water, it didn't hurt to wear it. For the evening, I chose an old bamboo fly rod with worn eyes, at least 50 years old. Most of the glass eyes were cracked or missing, which suited my needs perfectly. I also found an old Mitchell spinning reel that needed a good cleaning and lubrication. In the corner, there was a broken spinning rod with just the right eyelets. I was looking forward to tomorrow. The spaghetti dinner Alice prepared that night was wonderful. The only thing it lacked was some fresh Italian bread, which I made up for by having an extra beer. Despite it being summer, we decided to light a fire. It was cool enough to be comfortable, and I have to admit it was quite romantic. I spent just a few hours attaching the spinning eyes to my bamboo fly rod. With that done, I enjoyed the rest of the evening with Alice by the fire. She had an old-fashioned popcorn popper that we had fun experimenting with. We probably burned more than half of it, but we had a great time. As the fire was dwindling, Alice looked at me and asked, You're not going to make me sleep alone again, are you? Needless to say, I missed the early morning fishing. By the time we got out of bed, it was too late for breakfast, so we had omelets for lunch. Or was it brunch? I was surprised at how well we clicked in bed, just like we did at the dinner table. Alice insisted that I go fishing after lunch, saying she needed a break. It was reassuring to know that Alan had taught Alice the same bedroom tricks he had taught Marcy. I hate to admit it, but I'm an illegal fisherman. I spent 20 minutes collecting larvae from under stream rocks. While they were irresistible to the trout, the state didn't allow them. In less than an hour, I caught 4 beauties. That night's dinner featured fresh trout and home fries, with Alice also bringing out the Mateus rose she had saved for the occasion. It couldn't have been better. I had completely forgotten about my missing wife. After 5 days of blissful relaxation, I decided it was time for a brief trip to Plattsburgh. We enjoyed some burgers and fries and managed to get a cell phone signal, allowing me to reach Janice. Marcy was currently with the FBI, but Janice didn't have any more details. Frankly, I wasn't too concerned. I called the lawyer and learned that the divorce was proceeding as planned with no issues expected. The real estate agent informed me that we had an offer on the house, though she was frustrated because acceptance signatures were pending. I agreed to return the next day to sign the papers, but I had no idea how they would obtain Marcy's signature. The next morning, as I was preparing to drive back to Pennsylvania, Alice told me it wouldn't be necessary. Instead, we drove to Plattsburgh Airport, where a private jet was waiting for us. I was unsure how she had arranged this or even knew it would be there. 2 hours later, we were back home. It must be nice to have a wealthy father. I handled a few minor tasks while Alice visited her dad. 3 hours later, we were heading back to the lodge. Alice picked up a few more bottles of wine and a case of Foster's. She also bought some new undergarments, though I wasn't sure why. Returning to the lodge felt right. It was like I belonged there. 2 weeks later, Elwood Kincaid paid us a visit. Somehow, he had obtained my final divorce decree and I was officially free. He also brought a death certificate for Alice Hoffman, who had apparently drowned in shallow waters off Montego Bay. No one knew why or how he ended up there. The FBI no longer needed Marcy, so she was back with Janice. Mr. Kincaid had arranged for all the furniture and belongings from the house to be put into storage, and I wasn't sure if Marcy received any of it. My old job would be kept open for me if I decided to return. I was looking forward to winter along the west branch of the Chazy River.